Get ready to strap in for another exciting episode of No Driving Gloves, where Derek, John, and Will use over 75 years combined industry knowledge to bring you a bare-knuckled view of the collector car hobby. So let's get rolling. We're back again this week. Been a kind of a busy, exciting week for all of us. The downloads are up, obviously getting some listeners and striking a chord. And we're going to I'm going to say one of my hobbies in addition to podcasting and cars is kind of making. And we're going to touch on that making subject tonight a little bit. And all of us are going to kind of talk about the highs and lows about what we do in the shop when we're building cars, restoring cars, preserving cars, kind of things that we really enjoy, what makes us have a good day, the things that get put off to the very end of the restoration. We always have the little list. I don't really want to tune that carburetor or polish that piece, and it gets put off, and it's the last thing on the car. How are you guys doing tonight, Will or Derek?
Doing good. Just hanging out and ready to talk about my favorite things about building hot rods. And, some of the dislikes about it as well.
Well, it's all fun.
It is. It's all fun.
Is Derek out there somewhere?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Yeah, just been busy with work and doing some stuff in the garage here at home, playing with some of the cars, having a little fun, and looking forward to a fun conversation tonight, talking about our favorite things and playing with our cars and doing the work we do.
Well, you have that envious job of being self-employed, and you get to do whatever you want at work. Is the highlight of your day when you go in and get to fire an employee, or is it something else?
Oh, yeah, getting to do whatever I want to do. Not necessarily the case, but owning your own business definitely has it has its good points and its bad points. And I guess we'll start off with one of the bad things about building cars and owning your own business is the aftermarket parts that are available are, don't get me wrong, there are some great companies out there that make excellent products. But that's one of the biggest things that we have is we bring a car in and we use a lot of aftermarket electronics. And, if something goes bad, it could be a very costly fix for the shop. You can't charge the customer twice. So say you got an aftermarket electronic device that's hidden way up under the dash of a hot rod, and it goes out and car's not running right, or the gauges ain't working right, or, something's not acting right, you got to fix it. And one, you generally have to buy a new part. And then two, you have to install the part. And sometimes just finding the problem is very costly as well. So that's definitely one of the negatives doing this and relying on the aftermarket. We try to use OEM products or parts and pieces as much as we possibly can. Sometimes that's just not an option. We're trying to figure out how to put a rotary shift knob out of a new Ford Fusion in a car right now. That's going to be rather difficult to do. But nobody in the aftermarket offers a twist knob shifter, so. Which I probably wouldn't use it anyway because it would probably fail pretty quick.
Is that something you guys are designing all the electronics for and to making that piece work, or are you trying to utilize a lot of the Ford stuff, or it's hard enough for me to comprehend how the rotary shift knobs work because it's all electronics and I'm assuming some sort of servos, etc., or all ECU computers.
Honestly, it's really not that difficult. All these cars with paddle shifters, it's all the same thing. It's just a knob instead of a paddle on the steering column. And then every new car now pretty much has an electronic shifter, whether it's a twist knob or a shifter thrown up on the dash somewhere or some funky location. It's all electronic, and there's just the shifter just talks to, a motor that moves in increments to pull it from park to neutral to reverse down to drive and then 2 and 1 and etc. Theoretically, it's not that difficult. Now, what's the difficult part is making everything talk with each other. So you got to make the knob, one click, it go in reverse. Well, how far is it going to travel? How far does it need to travel on a Chevrolet transmission? That's the difficult thing of figuring all of this out. So we're going to try to utilize some of the Ford components, and then we'll probably have to actually make a few components as well to make all of that talk to each other, so to speak. We're looking forward to it. It's a challenge. I know we're kind of getting off subject already. It'll be a combination of OE Ford parts and then some aftermarket parts.
So now my question, Will, was that the owner's idea of how they wanted the car built, or is that an idea you guys had at the shop? And if it is the owner's idea, does that mean the owner is one of your least favorite parts of the build because they come up with these crazy ideas of things they want to see?
No, actually, that was one of our ideas at the shop. I pitched it to the owner, and he liked it. So, but some of the owners are very hard to deal with.
I was going to point out, remember, Derek has, I think, spent almost his entire life in museums and never had to work for the customer. And the customers
I still do some, private conservation consulting with clients. So I do get to work with, essentially customers sometimes.
Well, I think Will stayed on topic, though, because he in telling his biggest dislike, or one of his biggest dislikes, and that's the electronics and the poor quality of a lot of the aftermarket components, which it would be really nice if the general public understood how bad aftermarket components are. He also, I think, went into probably one of the fun things that I think he gets to do is creating and designing and making, overcoming the challenge of, first of all, putting a Ford part on a Chevy part and making it work, doing something nobody else has done. I mean, it's really easy if you can pick up your insert whatever racing catalog and order the part and bolt it in, and everybody can do it. It's kind of cool when you sit down and actually think that you actually engineer something that, the aftermarket's not doing and nobody else is doing on a big scale, and anybody that is doing it is designing it their way.
Yeah, you're exactly right, John. That is probably my favorite thing of building hot rods, is being able to be creative and having a customer like the guy we're doing this for, which just happens to be my uncle, to let us get creative and let us be a little different and understand that, it don't happen overnight. I mean, these cars are very, very, very costly to build. And one of the reasons is you are being different, but you're trying to be different but cool. And that's hard to come up with. And, we have help. We have help with some designers, and that kind of help us get over the hump on some things. But that's ultimately my favorite thing to do, is when one of the guys comes in through the office door and says, "Hey, come look at this. Let's come up with an idea for this part or this piece, or how are we going to attach the steering column?" Just little things like that really separates a creative hot rod builder and just an aftermarket part hot rod builder.
It's one thing I've always enjoyed when I've come to your shop with either a group or just myself to tour, and you're pointing out little things that I would have never thought of. Integrating of the GTR door handles into a Chrysler product for a street rod. And you just never even think, I never thought, well, cross nationalities, let alone cross manufacturers. And, I commend you on, seeing something on such a reasonably rare car, especially at the time you were building that Chrysler product. It was, amazed me, and it's something that stuck out in my head, not to mention the 1,000 other little details you did.
Yeah, that car actually has some Ford products on it, late model Chrysler parts on it. It's actually got some Chevrolet parts on it, believe it or not. The late model Hemi in that car actually has a big block Chevrolet water pump. So just to get the look that we wanted under the hood, the factory front cover and the water pump on them cars were just huge and massive and ugly. So we wanted to really clean that up. And so we come up with a new billet machine front cover that adapted a big block Chevrolet water pump, which are kind of small, nice and clean and tidy looking, and then built everything else around it. Doing that is probably my single most favorite thing when building and designing these state-of-the-art hot rods that we do.
See, you must have a really good relationship with your local parts supplier, because I'll walk in and I'll tell them I'm working on X vehicle, and they'll say, well, here's your water pump. And you go, no, I want this water pump. And they're going, no, that doesn't fit. You want this one. And there's one of my biggest, issues, I guess, when it comes to restoration or building cars or, some of the custom stuff. I want this piece, and they won't sell it to you because the computer says it doesn't fit. I mean, I go back 25 years when I was building my Isuzu convertible Isuzu pickup with a Corvette motor in it, and I wanted mufflers for it, and they wouldn't sell me mufflers off the shelf because those mufflers don't fit an Isuzu with a 4-cylinder. Well, it's not an Isuzu with a 4-cylinder, and we had a conversation about junkyards and being creative, and now the parts stores don't let you be creative, and it could be one of the reasons. It's so much easier. I have yet to have Amazon ever really argue with me. It'll tell me the part won't fit, but it'll still sell me the part.
That's right. Well, I'm pretty fortunate in that, being that we do have a local parts store just a mile down the road, and the guy who manages that store, his son works for me. So we can call and tell him what we need, and there's no questions asked, and they know that we're not doing the normal stuff, so they'll actually kind of go out of their way and actually help us out on some of this stuff. The more difficult side of things is when you need a new OE part, and you got to come up with VIN numbers, like the GTR door handles you mentioned, to buy any GTR parts at that point in time, because, they weren't out but maybe 6 months when we got those door handles. We had to have a VIN number to buy door handles. So letting somebody borrow your VIN number to buy parts was kind of difficult to find, but it worked out. We generally always find a way to get the parts that we need, and worst case scenario, if they're not out there, we'll just make them ourselves. Again,
it's having that challenge or that fun in the challenge, the thrill of the hunt and being successful in it. So I can see that.
And then that kind of falls into another one of my favorite things is actually making parts to go on these cars, whether they're machined, whether they're handmade out of sheet metal or hand whittled out of a piece of aluminum, whatever. That's definitely another one of my favorite things to do is the fabrication side of these cars. You can be as creative as you want to be, because you can make it however you want to make it. Whether it's a simple sheet metal inner fender or a super complicated dash that you've built from scratch. You can go whatever direction you want to go with it.
Yeah, and I think Will, it's interesting because as Will talks, I'm sitting over here listening, thinking, it's very similar favorite things about the hobby and restoring or doing the conservation work, things like that. But it's flipped just a little, I guess, is what I'll call it. Will talked about enjoying the build and the engineering of it. One of the things that's a thrill for me is when I get a car out that hasn't been running in decades. Starting that project is actually essentially the reverse engineering of it. There's been a lot of cars in my career so far that the only one left in existence or one of only a few left in existence, and no one has a manual that you can go to on, okay, this is how it runs. So you just start reverse engineering it and figuring out, okay, this lever does this control does that. Because especially at earliest days of the automobile, nothing was standardized. Every lever, every pedal did something different on every different make of car. So there's always that challenge, and I guess I find that extremely interesting and a fun part of the work that I do, with the cars and in the earlier world of the automobile. And then Will just also, you just talked about, machining parts and getting creative and doing this and, running down to the parts store and looking for something. And that's another one of my favorite things is making the parts and machining them, but in a little bit different sense, because a lot of the cars I tend to work on, I can't call up the auto parts store and say, hey, I need a part for this car. At my last job, 1912 Sandusky truck, the last surviving Sandusky truck known to still exist. And the carburetor was missing. Well, the actual one of the adjustment knobs on the carburetor was seized up and worn on the carburetor, and had to free it up, clean up the threads and everything on the part it mounted on. But the actual control knob itself was junk. I mean, it wouldn't work right anymore. So I stood at the lathe for probably about an hour or so, machining it, making sure it looked exactly the same as the worn part would have looked originally when it came out of the factory. So kind of, where Will, you have that kind of freedom of creating something that looks clean and cool, and the way you kind of want the car to look in your the hot rod world. I get that enjoyment out of remaking the part exactly as it historically was. So those are some kind of the things that I really, really enjoy.
Yeah, getting a car running, like you said, that hadn't been running in 50, 60 years, 70 years, would, if you're a car guy and you don't like that, something's wrong with you. I mean, that's just freaking awesome. And it's the same way here at the hot rod shop is, we use a lot of later model motors and fuel injection and stuff like that. But hearing a car bust off for the first time, in your shop after it's had every nut, every bolt, every panel massaged and worked, and there's something special about that moment of hearing any car fire up for the first time after a restoration or after it's been converted to a hot rod, or even John, I'm sure you've had a lot of experience with these old race cars and stuff that y'all get y'all's hands on and get them fired up for the first time.
I call it a bittersweet feeling. People always think, oh boy, you're done and you're getting it started. But sometimes, I'll be honest, the restorations take so long. Sometimes you're just glad that it's leaving your bay. And it's one of the, I'm going to say it's one of the happier things, because it's leaving my bay and I get to go into another project, because those last 100 hours or 150 hours of a restoration, they're doing all that stuff that I put off, that I did not want to do in the beginning or as I was putting it together. So it's always the cruddy work, and I never wanted to do it, and it's my fault for putting it off to the end. And then when I'm done with it, get it in, fire it up, yay, it can leave. And then I guess to add to it, it gets really good then when you get in it and it drives the way it's supposed to, and you can enjoy it, and you get out on the road with it. That culmination of finishing has a lot of different levels of euphoria for me. I'm very happy I'm done with it, and I get a new project, and I get to start those creative juices again. As Derek said, machining, finding the parts. We always try to find whatever original parts possible. Granted, a lot of what I work on is very low production, but fortunately, a lot of the parts on it were off mass-produced automobiles. You just have to know what the interchange manual is, and that interchange manual comes with years of experience. They didn't publish them. You can't find a interchange manual on a car they only built 20 of. You just have to know where those parts might be. But when you can't find them, you've got to make them. And in my life, it's ranged from making anything from little pieces of rubber to, grommets to whole car bodies. As I've said before, I can do it. I'm not the fastest, but there's ways of getting it done.
Yeah, that brings up another side of it that I guess it depends on the customer and the car. A happiness versus sadness of when these cars go home. There's been cars that we've worked on continuously for over 3 years. So you kind of grow attached to these vehicles. So and you grow attached to certain ones more than you do others. The ones that are more to your liking, you like better, and the ones that not really your style, then you don't mind seeing them go home. But the last car that went home out of our shop, that wasn't a happy day for me because I really liked that car. I liked it being around. I liked putting all the shakedown miles on it. And then you get some that you're glad to see them go. You're tired of working on them. You're glad to see them go home to their owner. Of course, you're going to see them again because something's going to happen with those aftermarket parts, and they're going to be back. But that's kind of a bittersweet thing with building these cars too.
Yeah, John mentioned that, I've spent a lot of my career most of my career in the museum world and not dealing with a lot of customers. And I guess, sitting here listening to you guys talk, I kind of laughed to myself in my head here. Maybe that's my my way of being selfish in this hobby, in this career is, I work at the museums where, I get the car running and they stay at the museum and I'm the guy that takes care of them. And when they come out to run, I'm the one that runs them. I don't ever have to send them home with somebody else. Until I leave the institution, they're just kind of there for me to operate and, become kind of part of my world. So maybe that's just me being selfish in that way.
There's a good and bad about that. Anymore, I've spent the last 10 years where I'm at, which is a museum. So the cars never go home. There's some cars I really wish would go away. There's some bad memories. We love them all. I mean, I guess they really become your children. I mean, like Will said, that's 3 hours of his shop, and that's not 3 hours of Will's life. That's 3 years of not just Will's life. That's 3 years of 6 or 8 different guys' lives at 2,000 hours a year. You've birthed this thing. It's like a child. At least to me, I'll be honest, I don't have children, but it's that kind of thing. As much as they annoy you and much as they hate you, and like I said, as much as I want to see some of them go home, it's nice to be able to go visit them and remember them and then be able to share them with other people. And there's some cars, when I was doing commercial restoration and doing it for customers, I'm still attached to the cars. I love seeing it when they pop up in magazine articles. I try to interject myself into, I was part of that lineage's life. And it really makes you feel proud of some of the stuff that goes home that you never see again, but you get the little snippets of, and it's doing well in the world. Or you bump into one of these customers, even if they were a pain while you were working on the vehicle. They're always happy, they always enjoy it, and they always are thanking you for what you did. Even if you gave them something that broke a few miles down the road and had to come back in and be repaired, they're always thankful because you were such a part of their life for, a restoration, 2,000, 3,000 hours, so 2 years. You were with this person, talking to this person weekly. Will's the same way, multiple years on projects, and these people become your friends. No matter how much we'll sit here and say they can be pains, it's that satisfaction of making them happy and sending them away happy.
Yeah, I can honestly say that we've had a lot of customers at Big Oak Garage, and every one of them but 2 I call my friends. Most of them I didn't know when they walked in the door. But if they called me right now, I'd give them the shirt off my back. And even if it was a car that was built at another shop and they needed me to come help, I'd be there in a heartbeat, So that's another great thing about our industry and what we do is 99% of the time your customers are going to become your family, and I can honestly say that's how it is here. We become close to our customers, and at the end of the day, at the end of the build, regardless if it's a small build, a 6-month build or a 3-year build, we always generally always wind up becoming super good friends and hanging out a lot more than than we ever have.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that is even kind of what John alluded to with you spend so much time on it, kind of becomes almost like your kid. You've brought, in some ways, we bring life to these vehicles. Like Will just said, if one of the owners called you up and you've gotten to know them through the build process and working with them as your customer, your client, part of it is that you meet some really great people and you become friends with them, but it also plays into the fact that it's kind of like that's your baby out there and it's having a problem. I got to go rescue it. So it's not only that you meet the friends and kind of in the realm of what I do, it's the other museums I kind of do, private work for, getting cars running for, different institutions and going back for special events and operating the cars for them. I've met a lot of great people at different small museums all around the area that have 1 or 2 cars in their collection, and you build a great relationship with them. But it's also that kind of going back to take care of that, almost kid that you've brought life to again, and you want to just see it keep up and keep going and be able to be out there and running and driving and having everyone enjoy it.
We had that experience with you, Derek, in the first weekend that I met you. Is when you go to a lot of these car events, the joy is seeing the things run, and the people are the best part of the car hobby, and you just want to help them out. And the weekend you were visiting us, we had an issue with one of the cars in the collection, and it's a little bit off our core collection, and you helped us diagnose some of the issues and what the problems were, and lend a hand to the best that you could in that situation. And there was a huge event going on, so the repairs couldn't happen that weekend. But I think if we would have put the wrenches in your hand and said have at it, you would have dove in just as hard as any of us to work on these cars. And chatting with some of my friends that recently returned from Goodwood, it's that camaraderie over there. If people were having problems getting their cars running to do the run up the hill, every mechanic was over there helping them, trying to get through that problem. As long as they were taken care of, they were there to assist. And I've seen that at various concours where the cars need to run and need to operate, and if somebody has an issue, you need a jump, you need a tool, you need a 10-millimeter spanner, you need something, somebody's going to go grab it and find it in their tools or do whatever they can to help you. If you need a push start, if you need pushed across the block because you have a race car, and race cars really don't, some cars don't like running at parade paces. So you need help. Everybody's always there to help you. Even this, I want to say the stodgiest, richest people in the world that don't want to get dirty, when it comes to helping out the other car people, 99 out of 100 times they're there to help you no matter what. And, when we came up with this topic, I think we were thinking, and we'll probably touch on it, some of the creating and some of the working with the tools, and we've touched on machining and dealing with electronics. But now we focus the last 10 minutes on the people. And by far and away, that's what makes my job the most rewarding, is either the person who comes in who's happy about seeing and learning, or the person who was there in the day and they're seeing their child brought back to life, and they can visit him again, and they have the ability to see that.
Yeah, you mentioned the people, and ultimately that's it's the same way in the hot rod industry. I remember being a kid, in the back seat of my dad's '56 Chevrolet driving across country, and if you saw another old car broke down on the side of the road, you pulled over and stopped and helped. You know, it didn't matter if you'd ever met them before in your life or not. And I still find myself doing that. I'll be going down the road and there'll be an old car on the side of the road with the hood up, and I'm with my wife and family, and heck, I just pull over and see what I can do to help. And, you know, I guess the whole car people are generally, you know, very good people and fun to be around.
Well, I didn't see you do it. I was somewhere else in the same traffic jam in Columbus, and you did that. You were tied up in traffic, moving at a snail's pace like all of us were. But you saw some other guy from the event who was broken down on the side of the road, asked if you could help. He had already called the tow truck, but you still pulled over, helped him out, and if I understood that right, you got him running and going, and, you know, I guess he abandoned the tow truck.
No, we did.
But right,
we sure
it
did.
was right there in the middle of rush hour traffic, and you had dinner plans, and you had to make these arrangements, and you still, you know, you stopped and helped. And again, that doesn't happen. I mean, guys in modern cars, we just drive down the side of the road and go, oh, too bad. Hope they have roadside.
Yep.
But when you're working with these classic cars, people stop and they help you. Maybe they shouldn't, and some of them aren't qualified. But it's one thing the classic cars do is that, you know, we really emphasize that the people are usually enjoyable in this hobby. So let's get back to try to bring the train a little bit back on track. And we've established that we're all great people, and the listeners fall into that too, because I'm assuming if you're listening, most of you are car people or understand car people.
Derek, are you a great person? Are you sure?
I think so. And, you know, for any of our listeners, if you're broke down on the, you know, side of the road, go ahead and just wait. Will or John or myself will be there someday to pull over and help you.
That's right. Oh.
Well, I'm sitting here thinking of what some of the things that I really enjoy, and what I really enjoy when it comes to my restorations or the museum work I do is the research. I love the stories behind the artifacts, the cars, finding out that little bit of trivia that makes the whole difference in the restoration. It involves a lot of reading and, you know, the Google searches, but a lot of times you'll do a Google search and you've got to read all this endless, mindless drivel that has been written, you've read 16 times, but there's one sentence or one paragraph in one article that all of a sudden provides that key to answer your question, but it's just alludes to something else, and then you have to take that information and it puts you on a new search road to fully figure out and document what's going on there. And like I say, that's one of the things that I enjoy the most, is that little bit of a treasure hunt. The map's there, but it's being able to utilize the map and then taking the clues off of the map and adding more information and more information. And it's I want to say it's that old pirate's treasure map, but the X isn't there. You're trying to find that X spot and finish. So again, one of the things I enjoy is that research side of it. And then on the teardown side, it's dirty and icky, and I'll be 100% honest. I do not like getting dirty. I don't like getting dirty. I don't like getting sweaty. I don't like grease. And I work on cars and I take apart cars. But if you're in there media blasting something or using the ultrasonic cleaners to clean up something and going through multiple layers of paint and finish and grease and grime to find out what it's supposed to be, those little discoveries, and then being able to prove it. And hopefully, I really enjoy proving people wrong. It's one of those little satisfactions. There's 2 license plates I bought when I was in Vegas many, many years ago. Love to win and hate to lose. And the more I do this, the more you learn those 2 license plates don't mean the same thing. And I love winning, and I love creating a theory behind some of my restorations and then being able to prove that theory right. It takes a lot of work to do that sometimes, and a lot of times I prove myself wrong. But I love winning, and it's so great when you find out that this finish is correct. Or I'll allude back to a Packard Cloverleaf Roadster that I restored, and it was funny to find that it was a 1917 car. And in 1916, these Cloverleaf Roadsters, and in 17 they only built 8 of them. I think they built 23 of them total over the whole model run between 1916 and 1919 or 1920. In 17 and 18, they didn't have a bit of chrome on them because it was the war and the conservation effort of the war, and they didn't want to waste the metal, and they didn't want to waste the chrome plating. But what we learned is they were chrome plated. They were chrome plated and then painted black to hide the chrome. It's the leftover parts that were produced from 16. It's kind of the finish on it correct, and I've got period photos of these pieces being black, but the pieces that came on the car that I was working on and then talking to others, and they all said, "Oh yeah, those are always chrome. You just have to just paint the chrome. Don't scuff up the chrome, just paint the chrome, and that's what you get." Or the crankcase on that car, there's a famous guy that sells a lot of engine paint, and what he says goes, and the client we had disagreed with him, and eventually I was able to prove the client right and this gentleman wrong, and we ended up having to custom make our engine paint. And I don't know how well that translates. I don't hang out with that many teens Packard anymore, but just put it this way, our research indicated that motor should not be the traditional Packard green. It was more of a Bell telephone green. This is what the owner believed in looking at photographs and documentation of cars from this era. It wasn't that green. It was this, it looked like the Bell telephone trucks, if any of you are old enough to remember the late 70s and early 80s before the Ma Bell breakup. So those are little areas that, like I say, I enjoy. It's that personal satisfaction of being right.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the things I enjoy as well in this, especially being in the museum field for as long as I've been in it, and having the opportunity to be involved in some of the cars that I've been involved in is the historic research. Because you can work in a museum, and yes, we know the history of a car, but there's always the little things, like John, you were pointing out, the little details that maybe they're not always captured in the history as well as they could be. I'm thinking of a couple projects I worked on over time, and probably one of the more interesting ones was the 1903 Packard Old Pacific, which was the second car to ever cross the United States, running from California to New York. The history on that car is fantastic. It was a well-documented journey. A lot of photographs, a lot of news articles written about it as it was going across the United States. Those details were there, but there were little things along the way that, kind of were questions as I was working on it, as we were digging into it. Well, when did this part get replaced? Because this clearly isn't an original Packard part. Or, why does this gear seem so low, compared to other 1903 Packard Model Fs? And when you start reading more of the documentation and digging up, especially Tom Fetch, who drove the car across country, his actual diary of the journey, you start finding out all these little details, and reading some of the Packard literature that was turned out on the car. The first time we drove it, you put it in low gear, in first gear, and you'd start off, and you'd get going a little ways, and you'd let off the throttle, and it's got a hand clutch on it, so you'd have to reach over and throw the clutch out. You shift it into second. By the time you were getting ready to pull the clutch back in, the car would almost be at a dead stop. It just, and what we found reading in the literature is that one of the things Packard did to the car before it left for the journey was put a lower gear ratio in first gear so that it would have better chance of climbing the hills and mountains on the journey. So little details like that. Okay, well, we'll start it in second gear and make it easier on ourselves, when we're running it. The car has a terrible lean to it. It actually, if I remember right, it leans in the front low to the left side of the car, if I remember the lean correctly. And in reading Tom Fetch's journal, all of a sudden I found an entry where he talked about going through basically a ravine area, and had to cut across a stream at the bottom of this ravine, and started driving in at a 45-degree angle. And evidently they missed spotting a hole in the stream, a deep spot. And the car fell into this deep spot. They had to work it out. His quote directly after that was, "The car never seemed to sit right after that." And the description he gave, the left front wheel fell into the hole, and it jarred the whole suspension on the car, so that it after that point had a lean to it. So it's finding those little things, and it's really an interesting kind of process that you go through to find those. Even on my personal cars, my 1917 Overland, I try to track the history back, so I know the owners, where the cars have been, as much as possible. And so far I've got it back to probably the mid 1950s, when it was actually at a dealership in Cincinnati, Ohio area. It actually was the William Choate dealership. I have a terrible time pronouncing that last name, but they're the family that owns the Cincinnati Reds, and or at least part owners. But it has the original decals still stuck on it from the dealership. And, I was able to track it starting with that, and then actually worked it forward through its time in the AMC collection, American Motors car collection, and then into the Chrysler Museum collection, which is where I purchased the car. And I'm getting excited to dig into the history of my Peerless that I acquired a little over a year ago. I haven't had a chance to dig in, but it's one of the fun things to be able to learn the history and tell the story of the car when you have it out at shows or driving around and people ask about it.
Yeah, I enjoy that part of it as well. We built a 65 Ford truck that we built as a shop truck. We put a big motor in it and straight shift. Didn't make it real nice, and for going to the parts store, hauling motors to the machine shop, just going to lunch, whatever. And come to find out, I'd done a little bit of history on it, and it was actually bought new in Cleveland, Tennessee, and was actually bought new as a shop truck for a gas station in Cleveland, Tennessee. And to me that just made it all worthwhile, knowing that it was a shop truck the day it was bought, and it was converted back into a shop truck after we finished making a hot rod shop truck out of it.
Yeah, and I think that's the cool thing, especially maybe with what Will does. On my end, it's kind of just keeping the history alive of some of these cars and bringing them back out for people to see them. John, you and I have kept in touch a number of times over the years. And one of the things that you guys were involved with a little bit was, of course, when I was at Henry Ford Museum and we were bringing the Type 38 Lotus back into operational condition. You guys down there have a ton of Lotus knowledge and offered a lot of advice on that project. But again, it's bringing that history that car kind of has already created back to life and back in front of people. Whereas Will, I think it's kind of cool because you're also, in the things you do, like with the shop truck, that truck was bought brand new as, for the purpose of being a gas station shop truck. and now you've done it as a shop truck as well, but you've kind of added that history of it being hot rodded, and it's another kind of part of its life that has a unique story, and you're kind of adding to it. Whereas in my line, we're adding to the story of it that it got running again in 2010 or whatever, but it's not like it's having almost a new life or a rebirth the way that you kind of do it in making it something almost new again.
Yeah, and on that truck, we actually left the original paint on it. We just restored the bottom side, updated the suspension, put a later model, big block Ford in it, and just made it so you could use it as a modern day shop truck, but the outside was still original paint. And the interior, we actually used the original seat and dash, and tried to keep all of that as original appearing as possible. And I don't know, my words of kind of preserving it as much as I could. I know y'all's Derek, y'all's definition of preservation is a little different than mine. We've touched on that before, but it's all we all do it for the same reason, because we love it, and ultimately that's apparently probably all three of us. Our favorite, one of the most favorite things about it is the history of it.
Sorry, guys, we went a little bit long tonight, so we're going to go ahead and break this into 2 episodes. So join us next week. We'll release on Monday morning and hear the second half of this discussion about tools, things we enjoy in the shop, people, things that frustrate us. Thank you for listening. If you have questions or comments, email us at nodrivinggloves@gmail.com. Be sure to subscribe to No Driving Gloves using your favorite podcast catcher. Follow No Driving Gloves, one word, on Facebook or Instagram. And most of all, please check out our page on Patreon, where you can help keep our tires rolling.